This video is for solving radical equations. Now, we broke it down in class in our notes to the 3 steps for solving a radical equation. Step 1, you have to solve for the radical. That means on one side of the equation, get the radical all by itself. Step 2, square both sides. Step 3, solve the remaining equation and check the answer to make sure that it satisfies the original equation. All right, so for example, in this first one here, I see that I have a radical equation. I see that I have a radical piece. I need to get that radical piece all by itself. So the first thing that I'm going to do is multiply both sides of the equation by 2 to get the radical all by itself. So that tells me that 32 is equal to the square root of x. All right, so now I have the radical isolated. Once the radical is isolated, to eliminate it, I'm going to square it. And in class, remember how we talked about the square root is the 1/2 power. If I take the 1/2 power and square it, they cancel each other out. That's why we square it. Well, whatever you do to one side of the equation, you have to do to the other as well. This, in turn, will give me x is equal to 32 squared, which is 1,024. I take 1,024 to double check my answer, and I say, all right, what's the square root of 1,024? That'd be 32. 32 divided by 2 is 16. I know it works. So let's take a look at this second equation here. I have to isolate this radical expression first. So that means I got to take that 2 and move it to the other side. I have the square root of 4x minus 7 is equal to 5. Now the square root is isolated. Step 2, I'm going to square both sides. Squaring the square root eliminates it. So I have 4x minus 7 is equal to 5 squared, or 25. Now solve the remaining equation. Add 7. 4x is equal to 42. 42, what the heck am I saying? 32. Divide both sides by 4, and I get x is equal to 8. All right, I take 8 and I substitute it back in. 4 times 8 is 32, minus 7 is 25. Square root of 25 is 5. 5 plus 2 is 7. Now, we probably won't ask these next kind on the test, but let me just show you how this eventually will evolve in your Algebra 2 classes. So if you notice, all of a sudden I have a variable on the right. Okay? I still see that this is a radical equation. So if it's a radical equation, I have to eliminate that radical. It's isolated. I'm going to square it to get rid of it. If I square the left side, I have to square the right side as well. Now squaring the left side just leaves me with x plus 3. But squaring the right side, remember, that's binomial multiplication. That's foiling. X minus 3 times x minus 3, which I know is going to multiply together to give me x squared minus 6x plus 9. Okay, so I have an equation now that I have to solve, and I notice that it's quadratic. If it's a quadratic equation, I have to set it equal to 0. That means this x on the left and this 3 on the left, I have to move them to the right, and I'm going to get the equation x squared minus 7x, subtract the 3, will be plus 6 equals 0. We can only solve quadratics when we set them equal to 0. To solve this quadratic, we did this back in December and January and February. We're going to factor it. And we know that this is going to factor by goal number factoring. It'll factor to x minus 6 times x minus 1. Then we apply the zero product property that says x minus 6 is equal to 0 and x minus 1 is equal to 0. And then solve each equation. The first equation I get x is 6. The second equation I get x is 1. Now, I'm going to substitute the 6 and the 1 each into the equation separately. So for the first problem, remember we're going back to the original. Let's take x as 6. If I plug 6 in for x, I get 6 plus 3 9. Square root of 9 is 3, equals 6 minus 3, or in other words, 3 equals 3. I know that this solution works. What if I plug 1 in? Well, I get 1 plus 3 is 4. Square root of 4 is 2. On the right side, I would have 1 minus 3, which is negative 2. 2 is not equal to negative 2. So we'll learn about this, and we'll talk about it in class a little bit. This is known as an extraneous solution. It's a solution that you found, but that solution doesn't work. So the x equals 6 is the only solution. All right, let me know if you have any questions. I know that last one's tough. I'm not going to ask that on our next test coming up.